Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Crawford, but everyone just calls me Jimmy. I've been a forest ranger here in the George Washington National Forest for 17 years now. That's longer than most folks have lived in these parts, and I know every trail, every creek, and every ridgeline from here to the next county over. I grew up in these mountains. My daddy did too, and his daddy before him. We're what you might call mountain people through and through. My great-granddaddy worked the coal mines back when Devil's Backbone Ridge was still pulling black gold out of the ground. That was before the seams ran dry and the mining companies packed up and left, leaving nothing but empty holes in the mountain and ghost towns scattered through the hollers. People around here tell stories about those old mining days. Strange stories. They say whole families just up and vanished from their company houses one day, leaving their suppers still warm on the table. They say if you listen real close near the old mine shafts, you can still hear voices calling from way down deep. I never put much stock in those tales. Mountain folks love a good story, especially after they've been into the moonshine. But 17 years of walking these ridges alone, and I ain't never seen nothing that couldn't be explained by common sense. Bears make noise. Wind plays tricks with sound. Shadows move when clouds pass over the sun. That's all there is to it. My job is simple enough. I prevent forest fires, patrol the backcountry, and keep hikers from getting themselves killed doing something stupid. In '87, I helped save over 200 acres when lightning started a blaze near Copper Creek. Trained 40-some junior rangers over the years. I coordinate with 12 volunteer fire departments across 3 counties. Point is, I know my business. That's why when I got the call about those college boys from Virginia Tech, I figured it was just another routine check. Some geology students had come out to study the old coal seams, looking at how the rock formations changed after all that digging. Smart kids with expensive equipment and proper permits, the kind who usually cause no trouble at all. But when I drove my truck up the old mining road that October morning, something felt off right from the start. It was too quiet. Now, I know quiet. Been walking these mountains alone for most of my adult life. But this was different. This was the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind had died down to nothing, though the weather service said we were supposed to get some strong gusts that day. The fog wasn't right either. It was too thick for October, hanging in the hollers like wet cotton, and it had this strange smell to it. Not the clean, piney smell of mountain mist. This smelled metallic, like old pennies, with something else underneath I couldn't quite name. I parked my truck at the end of the road and walked into their camp. The boys had set up neat and tidy, just like they were supposed to. 3 tents in a triangle, camp stove on a flat rock, gear organized in plastic bins. Their fire pit had been built proper, with stones arranged in a circle and cleared ground all around. But nobody was there. Their breakfast was still laid out on the camp table. Scrambled eggs in a pan, still yellow and soft. Coffee in 3 metal cups, still warm enough to steam in the cool air. Bacon on paper plates, grease still liquid. It looked like they'd just stepped away for a minute, maybe to use the woods or fetch water from the creek. I called out their names, had them written on my permit clipboard. Tom, Mike, David. My voice echoed strange in the fog, like it was being swallowed up before it could travel far. No answer. I checked their tents. Sleeping bags were rolled up neat. Clothes folded proper. Personal stuff still there. Wallets, car keys, cell phones. Nobody runs off into thieves. The woods without their car keys. That's when I noticed their equipment was missing. All the fancy geology stuff. Core samplers, measuring tools, those electronic gadgets they use to test rock hardness. Gone. But their personal gear, the stuff you'd actually need to survive in the woods, was still sitting right there. I've been doing this job long enough to know when something ain't right, and this definitely wasn't right. I followed their boot prints from the camp. 3 sets, clear as day in the soft ground. They led straight toward the old mine entrances, just like I figured they would. These college boys wanted to study coal seams, so of course they'd head for the mines. The problem was, those mines were supposed to be sealed. The state sealed them back in '73, right after some kids from town got hurt exploring. They used concrete and steel plates, blocked every entrance they could find, put up warning signs in 3 languages, made it real clear that going into those mines was a good way to die from bad air or cave-ins. But as I followed those boot prints through the fog, I could see light coming from up ahead. Not sunlight. This was artificial light, like from flashlights or lanterns. Mine shaft number 7 had been the biggest operation on Devil's Backbone Ridge. The main entrance was a square hole cut right into the mountainside, big enough to drive a truck through. When they sealed it, they used enough concrete to build a house. That seal should have been solid as bedrock. Instead, it was standing wide open. The concrete was pushed out from the inside, cracked and crumbling like something had been hammering on it from down in the dark. Steel reinforcement rods were bent and twisted, and there, plain as day, were fresh boot prints leading right into the black mouth of that mine. I stood there staring at that impossible sight, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the state boys hadn't done their job right 18 years ago. Maybe water had gotten behind the concrete and frozen, cracking it open. Maybe. That's when I heard the voice. "Jimmy? Jimmy, you out there?" It was coming from deep inside the mine. A man's voice, echoing off rock walls and tunnel supports. Familiar voice, too, though I couldn't quite place it. "Jimmy, I need help. Come on down here." I took a step closer to the entrance, peering into the darkness. My flashlight beam barely made a dent in the black. The voice seemed to be coming from way back in there, past where I could see. "Who's that?" I called back. "You one of the students?" "It's me, Jimmy. You know me." Something about the way he said that made my skin crawl. Not the words, but the tone. Like he was trying too hard to sound friendly. Like he was reading from a script. I knew the students' names from their permits. Tom Brennan, Mike Stevens, David Park. This voice didn't sound like any of them would sound. It was older, rougher around the edges. Mountain accent, but not quite right. "I'm coming in," I called. "Stay where you are." I clicked on my big flashlight and stepped into the mine. The smell hit me first. That metallic smell from the fog, but stronger now, mixed with the musty smell of old coal dust and something else, something sweet and rotten, like meat that's been left out too long. The mine tunnel stretched ahead of me, disappearing into darkness beyond my light. Railroad tracks ran down the middle, old and rusty but still solid. Wooden support beams held up the ceiling every few yards, some of them newer than they should have been. That stopped me cold. These mines had been abandoned for 40 years. Any new timber should have rotted away to nothing by now. But some of these supports looked fresh cut, maybe a few years old at most. "Jimmy, over here." The voice was coming from up here. D passed a curve in the tunnel. I followed it, keeping my light trained on the ground. The boot prints were still there, along with something else that made my mouth go dry. Drag marks, like someone had been pulled along the tunnel floor. I reached the curve and turned my light around the corner. The tunnel opened up into a wider chamber, one of the old excavation sites where they'd followed a rich vein of coal. My light picked up shapes scattered across the floor. Equipment. The students' missing geology gear, spread out like it had been dropped in a hurry. Core samples in plastic bags. Electronic testing devices with their screens cracked. A laptop computer, closed, but covered in coal dust. But no students. "Down here, Jimmy, in the back." I swept my light toward the rear of the chamber. There was another tunnel opening back there, smaller than the main shaft. Dark as sin, with cool air flowing out of it that made my flashlight beam dance. That's when I realized who the voice reminded me of. My brother Danny. Danny had died in Vietnam in 1969. I was just 18 when we got the telegram. Never saw his body, never got to say goodbye. Just a flag and a folded uniform and a hole in our family that never quite healed. But that voice calling from the darkness sounded exactly like Danny sounded when we were kids, playing hide-and-seek in the woods behind our house. I stood there in that chamber, surrounded by abandoned equipment and drag marks, listening to my dead brother's voice call my name from the depths of an abandoned coal mine. And for the first time in 17 years of walking these mountains, I felt real fear. I should have left right then. Should have backed out of that mine, called for help, waited for backup. That's what my training said to do. That's what any sane person would do. But it was Danny's voice. I pulled out my radio to call Pete Mullins, my backup ranger. Pete had been working these mountains almost as long as me, and he knew the old mining areas better than anybody. If something strange was happening up here, I wanted Pete to know about it. Static. Nothing but static and a weird humming sound that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. I tried my cell phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual this far back in the mountains. But the screen was acting funny, flickering between different displays like something was interfering with it. "Jimmy, please, I'm hurt." Danny's voice again, weaker now, like he was in pain. I knew it wasn't really Danny. Knew it couldn't be. But hearing that voice, sounding so much like my little brother when he was scared or hurt, I couldn't just walk away. I took my spare flashlight from my belt and clicked it on, giving me 2 beams to work with. Then I started toward that back tunnel, moving slow and careful, checking every step. The tunnel was smaller than the main shaft, maybe 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. Old mine cart tracks ran down the middle, and I could see where metal wheels had worn grooves in the stone over the years. The air coming out was cool and damp, with that same sweet rotten smell getting stronger. About 50 feet in, I found the first body. It was Tom Brennan, one of the students. He was lying face down next to the mine cart tracks, arms spread out like he'd been trying to crawl away from something. His backpack was torn open, contents scattered. His flashlight was still on, beam pointed at the tunnel wall, battery nearly dead. I knelt down and checked for a pulse, though I already knew what I'd find. He was cold, too cold for someone who'd just died. And there were marks on his neck, like someone had grabbed him with fingers that were too long and too thin. "Danny?" I called out. "Where are you?" No answer this time. I stood up and kept moving deeper into the tunnel. My lights picked up more equipment scattered along the way. Notebooks with pages torn out, plastic sample bags ripped open, electronic devices smashed against the tunnel walls. The tunnel curved to the right, then opened up into another chamber. This one was bigger than the first, with multiple passages leading off in different directions, and hanging from the ceiling were things that made no sense at all. Rope, lots of it, hanging down like vines in a jungle, but not normal rope. This stuff looked like it was made from hair or plant fibers, all twisted together into thick strands. Some of the ropes had things tied to them, personal items, wallets, watches, pieces of clothing, old stuff. Some of it looked like it had been hanging there for decades. In the center of the chamber was a pile of rocks arranged in a perfect circle. Inside the circle, the ground was dark and wet, like something had been spilled there recently. The smell was strongest here, that sweet, rotten smell that made my stomach turn. That's when I heard the singing. It was coming from one of the side passages, echoing off the rock walls. Multiple voices, harmonizing like a church choir, but singing words I couldn't understand. The melody was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like a lullaby written by someone who'd never known peace. And underneath the singing, I could hear something else. Scratching sounds, like fingernails on stone. I chose the passage where the singing was loudest and followed it deeper into the mountain. My flashlight beams were getting weaker, batteries running down, but I could see something up ahead, a faint glow like candlelight or firelight. The passage opened up into the biggest chamber yet. This one had to be natural, not carved out by miners. The ceiling disappeared up into darkness, and there were rock formations hanging down like teeth in a giant mouth. But what stopped me dead was what I saw on the far side of the chamber. People. Or things that used to be people. They were tall and thin, so thin they looked like they were made of paper and shadows. Their skin was white as bone, and their eyes were huge and black, like they'd adapted to living in the dark. They moved wrong too, like their joints bent in directions human Joe. Ints weren't supposed to bend. There were maybe a dozen of them, arranged in a circle around something on the ground. They were the ones singing, their mouths open wide, showing teeth that were too sharp and too many. And in the center of their circle were Mike Stevens and David Park, the other two students. They were alive but not moving, just lying there with their eyes wide open, staring at nothing. One of the thin things looked up at me. When it spoke, it was in Danny's voice. "Hello, Jimmy. We've been waiting for you." I stood there frozen, watching those things stare at me with their huge black eyes. My mind was trying to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to find some rational explanation that didn't involve monsters in abandoned coal mines. But there wasn't one. "You're not Danny," I managed to say. The thing that had spoken tilted its head to one side, too far to one side, like an owl. "No," it said in Danny's voice. "But we remember him. We remember everyone who comes down here." It stood up, unfolding itself like a piece of paper. It had to be 7 feet tall, maybe more, but so thin it looked like a strong wind would blow it away. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its fingers were longer than any fingers should be. "We've been waiting so long," it continued. "So long since anyone came to visit. The miners stopped coming. The explorers stopped coming. We got so hungry." More of them were standing up now, moving with that wrong, jointless motion. They formed a loose circle around me, but they didn't seem to be in any hurry, like they knew I couldn't escape. And looking around that chamber, I realized they were right. There was only one way in and one way out, and they were between me and the exit. "What happened to the miners?" I asked, trying to keep them talking while I looked for options. "The families that disappeared?" "They joined us," the Dutch anything said. "Just like you're going to join us. Just like your friends already have." I looked at Mike and David again. They were breathing, but their eyes were empty, like nobody was home behind them anymore. "We don't kill," the thing explained. "We transform. We make you into one of us. It's better down here in the dark. No pain, no hunger, no loneliness. Just the songs and the cool stone and the deep places where nobody can hurt you." "The college boys," I said. "Tom Brennan. What did you do to him?" "He fought us. They usually do at first, so we had to be rough. But he's sleeping now, and when he wakes up, he'll be one of us. Just like the miners. Just like their families. Just like everyone who comes down here eventually becomes." That's when I understood. These things, whatever they were, they'd been down here for decades, maybe longer. Taking people who wandered too close to the old mines, transforming them, building their colony in the darkness. And now, they wanted me. "Why my brother's voice?" I asked. The thing smiled, showing those two sharp teeth. "We taste memories in the blood. We learn voices from the bones. Your brother called for you when he died, Jimmy. Called your name in the jungle while the bullets flew. We remember that calling." Something hot and angry flared up in my chest. These things were using Danny's memory, twisting it into something horrible. That was wrong on a level that went deeper than fear. "You got no right," I said. "We have every right," it replied. "We are what this mountain made us, what the coal and the darkness and the deep places created. And now you'll be part of that creation too." They started moving closer, all of them at once, with that coordinated motion like a flock of birds or a school of fish. I realized they were connected somehow, sharing thoughts or instincts. I pulled out my spare flashlight and clicked it on full brightness, sweeping the beam across their faces. They recoiled, covering their huge eyes with those two long fingers, making sounds like hissing cats. Light, they didn't like legs. I had maybe 30 seconds before they recovered and rushed me. I looked around the chamber desperately, looking for another way out. That's when I saw it, a narrow crack in the rock wall behind where the students were lying. Cool air was flowing through it, which meant it led somewhere. I ran toward it, jumping over Mike and David, hearing the hollow men scrambling after me with sounds like fingernails on chalkboard. The crack was barely wide enough for my shoulders, but I squeezed through, scraping skin off my arms and back. On the other side was another tunnel, this one flooded ankle-deep with cold water. I could hear the hollow men trying to follow, but they were too big to fit through the crack easily. I had a head start, but not much of one. I ran through that flooded tunnel, splashing and stumbling in the dark, my flashlight beam bouncing crazily off the walls. Behind me I could hear them breaking through, their voices calling in perfect harmony. "Jimmy, Jimmy, come back! We just want to help you!" All in Danny's voice, all of them. The tunnel split ahead of me. I chose the left branch because the water was flowing that way, hoping it led to an exit. The current was getting stronger, which meant I was going downhill, hopefully toward the outside world. But the tunnel was getting narrower too. Soon, I was crouching, then crawling through water that was getting deeper and colder. My flashlight was starting to dim, battery nearly dead. That's when I realized where I was. This was one of the old drainage tunnels built to keep water out of the mining operations. If I was right, it should connect to a drainage outlet somewhere downhill from the main mine entrance. The hollow men's voices were getting fainter behind me, but I could still hear them singing. That horrible, beautiful song that made my teeth ache. I crawled through the rising water for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My flashlight died completely, leaving me in absolute darkness. The water was up to my chest now, and the tunnel was getting so narrow I could barely move forward. Then I saw it, a faint gray light ahead. Daylight. I pulled myself through the last few feet of tunnel and burst out into open air, tumbling down a rocky slope into a creek bed. The fog had lifted while I was underground, and the sun was shining bright and warm on my face. I lay there in the creek, gasping and shaking, listening to the normal sounds of the mountain. Birds singing, wind in the trees, water running over rocks. It took me a long time to get back to my truck. I called the state police from the first phone I could find in a gas station 20 miles down the mountain. Told them we had missing persons in the old mine workings, possible cave-in, need immediate search and rescue. They sent up a team with proper equipment, oxygen detectors, cave-in specialists, all the gear you need for underground rescue work. I led them to mine shaft number 7, but when we got there, the entrance was sealed again. Fresh concrete, poured neat and smooth, like it had never been opened. The rescue team broke through anyway, found the main tunnel partially collapsed about 100 feet in. No sign of the students, no sign of the equipment I'd seen scattered around. No sign that anyone had been in there for years. They brought in dogs. Searched every accessible tunnel and chamber in the whole mine complex. Found nothing but old mining equipment and some animal bones that the experts said were probably from deer that had fallen into sinkholes. The official report said the 3 students had probably gotten lost hiking and would turn up eventually. Case stayed open for 6 months, then got filed away with all the other missing persons reports that never get solved. I never told anyone what I really saw down there. Who would believe it? Mountain folklore and ghost stories don't make good police reports. But I put in for a transfer the next week. Couldn't stand bees being up there on Devil's Backbone Ridge anymore. Every time the wind blew through the trees, I heard singing. Every shadow in the woods looked like something too tall and too thin. Every echo from the mountains sounded like Danny's voice calling my name. They moved me down to the flatlands in the eastern part of the state. Nice enough work, mostly dealing with campers and lost hikers, nothing too challenging. I've been here 3 years now and I sleep better at night. But I still keep in touch with Pete Mullins, my old backup ranger. He tells me things are quiet up on Devil's Backbone. No more missing hikers, no more strange reports from the old mining areas. He also tells me they had to seal mine shaft number 7 2 more times since I left. Each time, local folks reported hearing singing coming from inside the mountain. Beautiful, haunting songs that made people want to get closer, want to find out where the music was coming from. The state finally gave up sealing it and just put up a fence around the whole area. Posted it as off-limits due to geological instability. But Pete says kids still try to get in sometimes, drawn by stories about treasure hidden in the old mines. Most of them come back out after a few hours, disappointed and empty-handed. Some of them don't come back at all. And on quiet nights when the wind is just right, Pete says you can still hear voices calling from deep in the mountain. Familiar voices. Voices of people who went missing years ago, calling for their friends and family to come join them in the dark. I don't go back to visit anymore. Don't plan to, ever again. Some places are better left alone, and some doors are better left sealed. But sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in bed, I hear Danny's voice in the wind outside my window, faint and far away, but clear as day. "Jimmy," he calls. "Jimmy, come home." And part of me, the part that still misses my little brother after all these years, wants to get up and walk back to those mountains, wants to find that mine shaft and go down into the darkness where Danny's waiting for me. That's the worst part about the Hollow Men. They don't just take your body, they take the voices of everyone you've ever loved, and they use them to call you back. My name is Dorothy Morrison, but everyone calls me Dot. I've been a park ranger here in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old mountains could throw at me. Bears wandering into campsites, hikers getting lost in fog so thick you can't see your own hands, storms that come out of nowhere and turn gentle creeks into raging rivers. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. It was December 1979, and I was working the Cades Cove district. That's the pretty valley where families love to camp and see the old cabins from the 1800s. Most folks don't know that before white settlers ever set foot here, this was Cherokee hunting ground, sacred ground. The Cherokee have stories about this place that go back hundreds of years. Stories I used to think were just made-up tales to scare children. I should tell you a bit about myself so you understand why what happened next changed everything I believed. I'm 38, moved here from Atlanta after my divorce. Used to be a school teacher before I fell in love with these mountains. I know every trail, every creek, every old cabin foundation in my district. I speak enough Cherokee to talk with the tribal consultants who help us with our history programs. And I pride myself on being practical, logical. I always figured the old stories about little people and strange beings in the mountains were just folklore. Pretty stories to tell tourists around campfires. The storm hit on December 18th. Not just any storm, but one of those freak blizzards that dumps 3 feet of snow in 12 hours. The kind that makes the Park Service close all the roads and tell everyone to stay put until plows can get through. I was supposed to head back to headquarters that morning, but the weather report changed everything. "Dot, you're stuck out there until this thing passes," my supervisor told me over the radio. "Just keep the fire going in the old ranger station and wait it out." The ranger station in Cades Cove is this little log cabin from the 1930s. Cozy enough with a wood stove and emergency supplies, but it sits right at the edge of the valley, surrounded by woods so thick and old they make you feel small. On a normal day, I love that feeling. That day, something felt different. The snow started falling around noon, and by evening it was coming down so hard I couldn't see the old church across the meadow. But here's the strange part, and I swear this is true. Sometimes the snow seemed to be falling up instead of down, just in little patches, like someone was blowing it around with invisible hands. I was making coffee around 8 o'clock when I heard the knocking. 3 slow knocks on the door. Then nothing. Now, nobody should have been out in that storm. The roads were completely blocked, and the nearest campground was 8 miles away. But people do stupid things, especially city folks who don't understand how fast weather can turn deadly in the mountains. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. Nobody there. Just snow swirling in the wind and my own footprints from earlier, already half filled in. But there were other marks in the snow. Small footprints, like a child had been standing right outside my door. Bare footprints. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" The wind carried my voice away, but for just a second I thought I heard something else. Like children laughing, but far away and muffled by the snow. I followed the footprints with my flashlight beam. They led away from the cabin toward the old Elijah Oliver place, one of the settler cabins we keep maintained for tourists. But these prints were strange, too small for any adult, and who lets their kid run around barefoot in a blizzard? The prints stopped at the old split-rail fence around the Oliver cabin. Just stopped, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. I stood there in the snow, flashlight beam dancing around the empty yard, and felt something I hadn't felt since I was a little girl afraid of the dark. That creeping certainty that something was watching me, something I couldn't see. The smart thing would have been to go back inside, lock the door, and wait for morning. But 12 years of ranger training kicks in when someone might be in trouble, even if that someone was apparently a barefoot child who could disappear without a trace. I started toward the cabin, following a hunch, and that's when I saw them. Lights. Little flickering lights moving around inside the Oliver cabin, like candles or lanterns. But the cabin had been locked up for winter, and there was no electricity out here anyway. My radio crackled with static when I tried to call it in. The storm was probably messing with the signal, but I needed to check this out. Could be kids from one of the campgrounds who got lost and broke into the cabin for shelter. The front door was standing wide open. I know for a fact I'd checked that lock myself just 2 weeks ago. Everything was secure for winter. But now the door hung open like someone had been expecting me. "Hello? Park Service?" I called out, stepping carefully onto the old wooden porch. "If anyone's in there, you're not in trouble. I just need to make sure you're safe." My flashlight beam cut through the darkness inside. The cabin looked normal at first. Old wooden table, stone fireplace, rope bed in the corner. But there were wet footprints on the floor, lots of them. Small prints, like children had been running around inside. And there was something else. The air smelled wrong. Not musty like an old cabin should smell, but fresh and clean like underground water. Like caves. I stepped inside, and that's when I heard the singing. Soft voices, high and sweet, coming from somewhere deeper in the cabin. But the Oliver place is just one room and a loft. There is no deeper. The singing was coming from behind the fireplace. I moved closer, following the sound, and noticed something I'd never seen before in all my years taking tourists through this place. There were symbols carved into the stones around the fireplace. Not pioneer markings or Cherokee writing, but something older. Spirals and circles and shapes that hurt your eyes to look at for too long. The singing got louder. I knelt down and ran my hand along the bottom edge of the fireplace. My fingers found a gap in the stones, then another. The whole bottom section of the fireplace was loose, like it could swing open. "What the hell?" I whispered. I pushed on the stones and they moved. Not like a door, but like they wanted to move. Like they'd been waiting. Behind the fireplace was a tunnel. Not dug by settlers or even Cherokee, but carved right out of the rock. The walls were smooth as glass and covered with more of those strange symbols. And the singing was coming from down there, echoing up from somewhere deep underground. My flashlight beam barely reached 20 feet into the tunnel before the darkness swallowed it up. But I could see more wet footprints on the smooth floor, leading down into the earth. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around and run. But somewhere down there, children were singing. Lost children who needed help. I radioed headquarters one more time. Nothing but static. "Okay, Dot," I said to myself. "Just a quick look. Mark the tunnel, then come back with backup when the storm clears." I stepped into the tunnel. The temperature dropped 20 degrees immediately. My breath came out in white puffs and my flashlight beam seemed weaker, like the darkness was eating the light. But the singing was clearer now. Children's voices, maybe 6 or 7 of them, singing something that sounded almost like a lullaby. The tune was pretty, but the words weren't in any language I recognized. The tunnel sloped downward, curving gently to the right. The walls stayed smooth, and every few feet there were more symbols carved deep into the rock. Some looked like people holding hands. Others showed children dancing in circles. And a few showed things I didn't want to think about too hard. I'd gone maybe 100 yards when I came to a wider space, like an underground room. My flashlight beam swept across stone walls, a ceiling lost in shadows, and something that made my blood freeze. Dozens of small white flowers arranged in perfect circles on the floor, and in the center of each circle, a child's toy. Old toys. Some looked like they were from the 1800s. Wooden dolls, hand-carved animals, little metal cups. Others were more recent. A plastic doll from the 1950s, a toy truck that couldn't be more than a few years old. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heart pounding and the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. And then, very softly, the sound of bare feet on stone. They came out of the shadows at the edges of my flashlight beam. Children, but not like any children I'd ever seen. They were pale. Not just light-skinned, but white as fresh snow. Their hair was so blonde it was almost silver, and it hung long and straight around their faces. They wore simple clothes that looked handmade, rough tunics and pants like something from centuries ago. But their eyes, God help me, their eyes. They were completely white, no pupils, no color, just solid white like milk, and they were looking right at me. There were 7 of them, standing perfectly still around the edge of the room. The youngest looked maybe 5 years old. The oldest couldn't have been more than 12. They didn't blink, they didn't breathe. They just watched me with those terrible white eyes. "Hey there," I managed to whisper. "Are you kids okay? Are you lost?" The smallest one stepped forward. When she opened her mouth, her voice was like silver bells. "We've been waiting for you, Ranger Morrison." She knew my name. I should have run right then. Eve. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to turn around and get out of that tunnel as fast as my legs could carry me. But the ranger in me, the part that had spent 12 years helping people in trouble, kept me frozen in place. "How do you know my name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The little girl tilted her head, and her silver hair fell across her face like a curtain. "We know many things. We know you help people. We know you're kind. We know you're alone." The other children started moving then, not walking but gliding across the stone floor. They made no sound at all. They arranged themselves in a circle around me, but not close enough to touch. Not yet. "Where are your parents?" I asked. "How did you get down here?" A boy who looked about 10 stepped forward. His white eyes seemed to glow in my flashlight beam. "We don't have parents like you mean. We have been here since before the Cherokee came, since before the ice went away. We are the moon-eyed children." My blood went cold. I knew that name. Every ranger who worked with Cherokee consultants had heard it. The moon-eyed people were part of the old stories, the really old ones. Ancient beings who lived underground and came out only in winter. The Cherokee said they were here before anyone else. Pale creatures who could see in the dark and had eyes like the full moon. I'd always thought they were just myths. "That's not possible," I whispered. The little girl laughed, and it sounded like ice breaking. "Many things are possible in the old places, Ranger Morrison, especially when the snow falls up instead of down." She was right. I had seen the snow falling upward around the cabin. How could she know that? "We get lonely," another child said, a girl with braids so long they touched the ground. "We sleep most of the year, deep in the earth where it's safe. But when winter comes, we wake up, and we was and to play." "Play with who?" I asked, though I was starting to get a sick feeling about the answer. The children all smiled at once. Their teeth were perfectly white and sharp as needles. "With the children who come to our valley," the boy said. "The ones who camp with their families. We call to them in their dreams. We show them the way to our tunnels. Most of them are too afraid to come. But sometimes," he gestured to the circles of toys on the floor, "sometimes they visit us, and they stay." My radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. Through the static, I heard a voice I recognized. Jim Patterson, the ranger who worked the visitor center. "Dot? Dot, come in? We've got a situation out here." I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "Jim, I'm here. What's going on?" "Family came in about an hour ago. The Hendersons from Ohio. Their 8-year-old daughter is missing from their campsite. Little blonde girl named Sarah. They said she was playing outside their RV when the storm hit, and when they went to check on her, she was gone, left her coat and shoes behind." The moon-eyed children were all staring at me now, their white eyes unblinking. "Did they find any tracks?" I asked. "That's the weird part. There are small footprints leading away from their site, but they're not wearing shoes. What kind of kid runs off barefoot in a blizzard? And Dot, the tracks lead toward Cade's Cove, toward your area." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the radio. "How long ago did she disappear?" About 3 hours. We can't get search and rescue out there until the storm passes. But if she's somewhere near the valley, I'll find her, I said. I'll call back when I know something. I looked up at the moon-eyed children. They were all smiling now. Sarah Henderson, the little girl said softly. Pretty name. She has such bright dreams. We showed her the way to us, just like we showed you. Where is she? I demanded. What did you do with her? She's safe, the boy said. She's with us now. She's learning our songs, learning our games. She'll be so happy here. You can't keep her. She has a family, parents who love her. The little girl's expression didn't change. Families change. Parents die. Children grow old and forget how to play. But we never change. We never die. We never forget. Sarah will be young forever with us. I started backing toward the tunnel entrance, but the children moved with me, staying in their circle. My flashlight was getting dimmer, the beam weaker. Let me see her, I said. Let me talk to her. You can see her, the girl said. You can talk to her. You can stay with her. You can stay with all of us. The circle was getting tighter. I could feel the cold coming off their skin like winter fog. We've been watching you for years, Ranger Morrison, the boy said. You walk alone through our forests. You know our stories. You respect the old ways. You would make a good teacher for the children who come to us. You want me to help you kidnap kids? We want you to help them understand. Help them see that staying with us is better than growing old and sad in the world above. You know how cruel that world can be. You know about loneliness and pain and disappointment. He was talking about my divorce, about the years of trying to have children that never came, about the nights I lay awake in my empty cabin, wondering if anyone would miss me if I disappeared. How could he know about that? We can give you purpose, the little girl said. We can give you family. We can give you forever. My flashlight died. In the absolute darkness, I heard them moving closer. I heard the whisper of bare feet on stone and the soft sound of their breathing, if that's what it was. And then, from somewhere deeper in the tunnels, I heard another voice, young and scared, and very much alive. Help me! Somebody help me! I want to go home! Sarah Henderson. The darkness was complete, but somehow I could still see them. The moon-eyed children glowed with a soft white light, like moonbeams on snow. Their eyes were brighter now, like stars in the black. She's frightened, I said. She wants to go home. She'll understand soon, the little girl said. They always do. Fear fades, memory fades. Only the games remain. Sarah's voice came again, echoing from the tunnels behind them. Mommy, Daddy, where are you? That little girl's terror broke something loose inside me. I'd spent 12 years protecting people in these mountains. I'd pulled hikers out of ravines, rescued families from flash floods, fought off black bears with nothing but a stick and determination. I wasn't going to let some ancient creatures steal a child on my watch. I want to make a deal, I said. The moon-eyed children stopped moving. They looked at each other, then back at me. What kind of deal? The boy asked. Let me see Sarah. Let me talk to her. If she chooses to stay with you willingly, I won't try to stop you. But if she wants to go home, then what? The little girl asked. My mouth was dry as dust, but I forced the words out. Then you let her go, and I'll stay instead. The silence stretched out for what felt like hours. Finally, the boy nodded. Come then, see for yourself. They turned and glided deeper into the tunnel system. I followed, one hand on the stone wall to keep from getting lost in the dark. The tunnels branched and curved, leading down into the heart of the mountain. The walls were covered with more symbols now, and I could see that some of them were moving, shifting, and changing as I watched. We came to another chamber, much larger than the first. The ceiling disappeared into shadows above us, and the walls were carved with alcoves like sleeping spaces. In the center of the room was a circle of standing stones, each one taller than me, and inside the circle, sitting on a pile of furs and old quilts, was Sarah Henderson. She looked up when she saw me, and her face lit up with hope. "Are you here to help me?" she asked. "I got lost, and these kids said they'd show me the way back, but now I can't find the door." She was wearing the same clothes her parents had described, jeans and a sweater, but someone had given her a fur cloak to keep warm. Her blonde hair was tangled, and there were tear tracks on her cheeks, but she looked unharmed. "I'm Ranger Morrison," I said, kneeling down next to her. "Your mom and dad sent me to find you." "My mom and dad? Are they okay?" "I tried to find them, but these tunnels are like a maze." I looked around at the moon-eyed children. They were watching us with those blank, white eyes. But they didn't try to stop me from talking to Sarah. "They're fine, honey. They're worried about you. Do you want to go home to them?" "Yes," Sarah said immediately. "I want to go home right now. These kids are nice, but they're kind of weird. And they want me to drink this gross milk stuff that tastes like metal." The little girl stepped forward. "Sarah doesn't understand yet. She hasn't heard all our songs. She hasn't seen all our games. Give us more time." "No," I said firmly. "She wants to go home." That was the deal. The boy's expression darkened. "She hasn't chosen fairly. She doesn't know what we're offering." "I don't care what you're offering," Sarah said, standing up. "I want my mom and dad." The moon-eyed children moved closer to the stone circle. Their glow was getting brighter, and the temperature was dropping fast. Ice crystals started forming on the walls. "We've been alone for so long," the little girl said. And for the first time, she sounded sad instead of scary. "We just want friends. We just want family." "I know," I said, and I meant it. But you can't force someone to be your friend. You can't steal children from their families. "Their families will forget them eventually," the boy said. "Everyone dies. Everyone leaves. We never leave." "Maybe that's the problem," I said, standing up and putting my arm around Sarah. "Maybe you need to learn to let go." The moon-eyed children looked at each other, having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, the little girl sighed. "You made a deal, Ranger Morrison. The child may go, but you will stay." "Wait," Sarah said, looking up at me. "What does she mean?" "It's okay, honey. I'm going to get you out of here." But as I said it, I felt something change in the air. The symbols on the walls were glowing now, and the stone circle was humming with power. I could feel invisible chains wrapping around me, holding me in place. "A deal made in the deep places cannot be broken," the boy said. "You offered yourself in trade. We accept." I tried to move toward the tunnel entrance, but my feet wouldn't obey me. Sarah tried to pull me with her, but she couldn't move me either. "Let her go," I shouted. "She's just a child." "So are we," the little girl said. "We've been children for 1,000 years." That's when I remembered something Joseph Swimmer had taught me. Joseph was our Cherokee cultural consultant, an elder who knew the old stories better than anyone. He'd told me once about the moon-eyed people and how the Cherokee had dealt with them in the ancient times. "You're bound by the old laws," I said. "The same laws that keep you underground during the day. The same laws that make you sleep through summer." The children's glowing eyes fixed on me. "There are songs of protection," I continued. "Cherokee songs, songs of binding and releasing. If I sing them right, you have to honor them." "You don't know the songs," the boy said, but he sounded uncertain. "Joseph taught me," I said. "He taught me the winter blessing song, the one for safe passage through the spirit world." I started singing, my voice shaky at first, but getting stronger. I didn't know if I was remembering the words right, but I sang the Cherokee blessing Joseph had taught me for walking safely in places where spirits dwelt. The song about respect and balance and the proper way to ask for passage. The humming from the stone circle got louder, but the invisible chains around me started to loosen. "That's not fair," the little girl said. "We made a deal." "I'm not breaking the deal," I said, still singing. "I'm asking for safe passage for both of us, according to the old ways. The ways that were here before you, before the Cherokee, before anyone." The song ended, and the chamber fell silent. Finally, the little girl nodded. "You may both go," she said. "But remember this, Ranger Morrison. We are still here. We will always be here. And when children come to our valley and dream of playing in the snow, we will call to them." Then I'll be here too, I said. And I'll make sure they know the old songs, the ones that keep them safe. Sarah and I followed the tunnels back to the Oliver cabin in silence. My flashlight worked again once we left the deep chambers, and the path seemed shorter somehow, like the mountain was eager to let us go. We emerged from behind the fireplace into the cabin just as dawn was breaking. The storm had passed, and pale sunlight was streaming through the windows. Sarah blinked in the light like she hadn't seen it in days. "How long was I down there?" she asked. I checked my watch. It was 6:30 a.m. on December 19th. "About 10 hours, I said. But that couldn't be right. We'd been in those tunnels for what felt like days. Time worked differently in the deep places. I got Sarah back to her parents, who were waiting at the visitor center with Jim Patterson and a search and rescue team that had finally made it through the snow. The official report said she'd gotten disoriented in the storm and taken shelter in one of the old cabins. Nobody asked too many questions about the details. Sarah didn't remember much about the underground chambers. She said she'd had strange dreams about pale children who wanted her to play games, but she thought that's all they were, dreams. Her parents took her home to Ohio the next day, but I remembered everything. That winter, I started leaving offerings at the old stone circles hidden throughout Cades Cove. Not food exactly, but things children might like. Pretty rocks, wildflowers when I could find them, sometimes old toys from the thrift store in Gatlinburg. I learned more Cherokee protection songs from Joseph Swimmer, and I made sure to teach them to families who came camping in the winter months. The moon-eyed children kept their word, mostly. Other kids reported seeing white friends in their dreams when they camped in the valley, but none of them disappeared. A few times I found small barefoot prints in the snow near the campgrounds, but they never led to the tunnel entrances. I think the children were still lonely. I think they always would be. But maybe they understood better now that friendship can't be forced and family can't be stolen. I retired from the Park Service in 1995, but I still live in a cabin just outside Cades Cove. On winter nights when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls through the mountains, I sometimes hear children singing in the distance. The same songs the moon-eyed children sang in their deep chambers. I leave my porch light on during winter storms now, and I keep a pot of coffee ready. Not for the moon-eyed children. They have their own realm and their own ways. But for any lost soul who might need shelter from the cold and the dark. Because I learned something important in those tunnels beneath the mountain. There are older things than us in these mountains. Lonelier things. Things that remember when the world was different and time moved in circles instead of straight lines. And sometimes, if you know the right songs and show the proper respect, you can walk safely among them. Just remember, if you ever camp in Cades Cove during winter and your children start talking about dreams of pale friends who want them to come play in the snow, teach them the old songs. Teach them about respect for the ancient places. And whatever you do, don't let them follow the white children into the woods alone. Some games are meant to last forever, and forever is longer than any of us can imagine. My name is Robert Callahan, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia mountains had to offer. Black bears getting into campers' food, lost hikers wandering off trail, the occasional hunting accident. Normal stuff. Dangerous sometimes, but normal. The Cranberry Wilderness is my beat. 35,000 acres of the thickest, meanest country you'll ever see. Most folks don't realize how wild it really is out there. No roads, no cell towers, just mile after mile of rhododendron thickets so dense they call them laurel hells. You get turned around in there, you might not come out. I grew up hunting these mountains with my daddy before I took this job. Learned to track everything from white-tailed deer to wild turkey. Could tell you what kind of animal walked through just by looking at bent grass or a scuff mark on a tree. After 15 years wearing this badge, I figured I knew every creature that called these woods home. That was before August of 1978, before the bow hunters came stumbling into my station with a story that should have been impossible. The heat that summer was something else. Even up in the mountains, temperatures were hitting the high 80s every day. Animals were acting strange. Deer moving to higher ground weeks early, birds flying south like it was already fall. Old-timers in town kept muttering about how it reminded them of stories their granddaddies told about the wood booger, but I never paid much attention to that nonsense. I was raised Irish Catholic, and my daddy always said there were two kinds of people in this world: those who believe in fairy tales and those who deal with facts. I was firmly in the second camp. Mountain folklore was fine for scaring kids around a campfire, but when you're responsible for keeping people safe in 35,000 acres of wilderness, you stick to what you can see and touch and prove. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 bow hunters had hiked 15 miles into the wilderness to set up camp near Bear Creek. Good hunters, experienced guys I'd dealt with before. They knew the country and knew how to handle themselves. But when they showed up at my station that morning, they looked like they'd seen death itself. "Something attacked our camp," said Jake Morrison, the leader of their group. Jake was a solid guy, ran a hardware store in Elkins, not the type to spook easy, but his hands were shaking as he poured coffee from my pot. "Black bear?" I asked. It was the obvious answer. August was when the big males got aggressive, especially in hot weather. "No, sir," said Danny Webb, the youngest of the three. "This wasn't no bear. This thing walked on 2 legs. Had to be 8, maybe 9 feet tall." I'd heard this before. People get scared in the woods. Shadows play tricks. And suddenly every black bear standing up to scratch a tree becomes Bigfoot. But these guys were different. They weren't excited or trying to impress anyone. They were genuinely afraid. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said, pulling out my incident report form. Jake took a deep breath. "We set up camp Sunday evening about 2 miles south of Bear Creek Falls. Good spot, plenty of water, nice clearing. Everything was normal the first night. Monday morning, we split up to scout for sign." "That's when we found the tracks," Danny interrupted. "What kind of tracks?" "Like a man's foot, but bigger. Way bigger. And the toes were spread out funny, like it wasn't wearing shoes." I nodded and kept writing. Bare feet in the wilderness weren't unusual. Plenty of folks like to hike without boots, though it wasn't smart. "How big?" I asked. The 3 men looked at each other. 18 in. "Just maybe more," Jake said quietly. "And I mean the whole foot. Not just the heel to toe, but the whole damn thing." That got my attention. I'm 6 feet tall with size 11 boots, and my foot measures about 12 inches long. 18 inches would mean someone nearly 7 feet tall, assuming normal body proportions. "Could have been a bear track," I suggested. "When the mud's soft, they can spread out and look bigger." "That's what we thought at first," said the third hunter, Carl Russo. Carl was a quiet guy, worked construction. But there were 5 toes, clear as day, and they were in a walking pattern, not the shuffle bears do. I finished writing and looked up at them. They were serious, I could tell that much. But I'd been dealing with wilderness reports for 15 years, and people see what they want to see when they're spooked. "Anything else happen?" "We found our food scattered around Tuesday morning," Jake said. "Rope was cut clean through, not chewed. And our tent stakes were pulled straight up out of the ground. Not bent, not broken, just pulled up like someone with incredible strength yanked them out." That was interesting. Bears were strong, but they tended to destroy things messily. Clean cuts and straight pulls suggested human intelligence and tools. "You think someone's messing with you guys?" "Maybe," Jake admitted. "But who? We were 15 miles from the nearest trail, and the smell—" "What smell?" "Like a wet dog, but stronger. Musky. Kind of made your eyes water." I closed my notebook. "I'll drive out to the trailhead and hike in to take a look. Could be some kids from town trying to scare hunters. Could be a bear with unusual behavior. Either way, I need to check it out." As they were leaving, Danny turned back to me. "Ranger Callahan, be careful out there. I've been hunting these mountains for 20 years, and I've never felt anything like what we felt at that camp. It was like something was watching us the whole time. Something that didn't want us there." After they left, I sat in my station and thought about what they'd told me. Strange tracks, torn equipment, and the feeling of being watched. None of it was impossible to explain. But taken together, It was unusual enough to warrant investigation. I'd handled problem bears before, and if that's what this was, I needed to document it and maybe call in the State Game Commission. But as I packed my gear that afternoon, I couldn't shake the memory of how scared those 3 experienced hunters had looked. In 15 years, I'd learned to trust my instincts about the mountains, and my instincts were telling me that something was very wrong in the cranberry wilderness. I started the hike at dawn the next morning. The trailhead was empty except for Jake's truck, which they'd left there when they hiked out yesterday. The morning was already warm, and the forest felt too quiet. Usually you'd hear birds calling, squirrels chattering, the normal sounds of woods waking up. But it was silent except for my boots on the trail. The hike to Bear Creek takes about 4 hours if you know where you're going. I'd been there dozens of times. It's a popular spot for experienced backpackers because the water's clean and there's good fishing downstream. But as I got deeper into the wilderness, that wrongness I'd felt at the station kept getting stronger. About 2 hours in, I noticed the first sign that the hunters weren't imagining things. A deer trail I'd used for years was completely empty. Not just quiet. Empty. No fresh tracks, no droppings, no signs that any animals had used it recently. It was like every creature in the forest had just picked up and left. That's not normal behavior. Animals don't abandon good territory without a reason. Predators, disease, or some kind of major disturbance. Those are the only things that make wildlife clear out like that. I found their campsite just after noon. The hunters had cleaned up well, but I could see the damage they'd described. Tent stakes pulled straight up, rope cut clean, and the remains of their scattered food. What caught my attention, though, were the trees. 3 saplings around the clearing had been snapped off about 8 feet from the ground, not cut, not sawed, but twisted and broken like someone had grabbed them and bent them until they snapped. The break pattern was wrong for wind damage, and it would have taken incredible strength to do it by hand. I circled the campsite slowly, looking for the tracks they'd mentioned. Found them about 20 yards south of where they'd pitched their tent. Jake hadn't been exaggerating. They were definitely human-shaped, but massive. 18 inches long, about 8 inches wide, with 5 clear toe impressions. I knelt down and examined them carefully. The depth suggested something heavy, probably over 300 pounds. The stride length was close to 4 feet, which meant whatever made them had legs longer than any human I'd ever seen. But the strangest thing was how they just appeared in the middle of the clearing and disappeared again after about 6 steps. I took out my camera and shot a full roll of film, then made plaster casts of the 3 clearest prints. While the plaster was setting, I examined the area where the food had been scattered. The hunters said they'd hung their food bag 12 feet up in a tree, but the rope had been cut about 8 feet from the ground. Either someone had climbed up to cut it, or whatever did it was tall enough to reach it standing. The smell hit me while I was packing up the casts. Musky, animal-like, but with an undertone of something else. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was strong enough that I could taste it, and it seemed to be coming from the tree line south of the camp. I followed the scent into the rhododendron thickets. The undergrowth was so thick I had to crawl in places, following what looked like a tunnel through the branches. About 50 yards in, I found something that made me stop cold. Someone, or something, had built a shelter. It wasn't sophisticated, just broken branches and moss arranged into a lean-to about 8 feet long and 6 feet wide. But the engineering was sound, and it would have provided good protection from rain. The concerning part was that the branches used in construction had been broken off trees at heights ranging from 8 to 12 feet. Inside the shelter, I found more evidence of habitation. A pile of what looked like animal bones, most of them picked clean. A collection of smooth river stones arranged in a rough circle, and pressed into the soft earth, more of those massive footprints. I was taking photographs when I heard the sound. It started low, almost below the range of human hearing, a rumbling that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. Then it built into something between a roar and a howl, but deeper and longer than any animal I knew. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the rocks and trees until the whole forest was vibrating with it. I'd heard black bears roar before and mountain lions scream. This was neither. This was something bigger, something with vocal cords that could produce sounds no known animal could make. The roar lasted about 30 seconds, then faded to nothing. The silence that followed was complete. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just me kneeling in a crude shelter in the middle of 35,000 acres of wilderness, holding a camera with shaking hands. I got out of there fast. The hike back to my truck took 3 hours, and I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way. Not because I saw anything, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Several times I stopped and listened, but I never heard footsteps or saw movement. Just that persistent sense of eyes watching me from the trees. It wasn't until I reached my truck that I realized what was bothering Jimmy most. In 15 years of working these mountains, I'd never seen an area so completely abandoned by wildlife. No birds, no squirrels, no insects, even the flies that usually swarmed around decomposing organic matter were gone. It was like something had moved into that part of the forest, something that every other living creature recognized as a threat and fled from. I drove back to the station and developed my photographs, then spread them out on my desk along with the plaster casts. The evidence was clear and undeniable. Something large and bipedal was living in the cranberry wilderness. Something intelligent enough to build shelter and strong enough to break trees with its bare hands. I called Tom Wiseman, the senior ranger for our district. Tom had 30 years of experience and had seen everything the mountains could throw at you. If anyone would know what to make of this, it would be him. "I'll be there tomorrow morning," he said after I described what I'd found. "Don't go back out there alone, Bobby. Whatever this is, it's nothing you should be handling by yourself." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about that roar. About the way it had seemed to come from everywhere at once and how it had made the whole forest go silent. About tracks that appeared and disappeared like their maker could fly. I'd spent my whole life believing only in what I could see and prove. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept running through my mind. What if the old-timers' stories about the wood booger weren't just folklore after all? Tom arrived at my station before sunrise, carrying a duffel bag full of gear I'd never seen before. Plaster casting equipment, measuring tools, and what looked like recording devices. "You're not the first ranger to find tracks like these," he said as we loaded his truck. "Had a report from up in Pennsylvania last year, and another one from Kentucky the year before that. State keeps it quiet, but there's something out there." Tom was a big man, 6'4", and solid as a tree trunk. If he was taking this seriously, then I knew I wasn't losing my mind. The hike back to Bear Creek felt different with Tom along. He moved through the forest like he belonged there, stopping occasionally to examine broken branches or disturbed ground that I'd missed entirely. But even he seemed uneasy as we got deeper into the wilderness. "Animals are gone," he observed as we crossed a meadow that should have been full of deer sign. "That's not a good sign, Bobby. Predators don't usually clear out everything in their territory. They need prey to survive." We reached the campsite around noon, and Tom immediately went to work. He measured the tracks more precisely than I had, took soil samples, and set up one of his recording devices in the trees. While he worked, I kept watch and tried to ignore the feeling that we were being observed. "These prints are fresh," Tom said after examining them with a magnifying glass. "Made within the last 48 hours. And look at this." He pointed to details I'd missed. The toe impressions showed what looked like dermal ridges, like fingerprints but larger. The heel strike was deep but even, suggesting controlled movement rather than the heavy stomping you'd expect from something just walking on two legs. "Whatever made these has experience walking upright," Tom concluded. "This isn't some bear that's learned to stand up. This is a bipedal creature that's adapted for this kind of movement." While we were examining the tracks, his recording device started picking up sounds. Low-frequency rumbles, too deep for human ears to detect without amplification. The sounds were rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, and they seemed to be coming from multiple directions. "It's communication," Tom said quietly. "There's more than one of them, and they're talking to each other." The hair on my arms stood up. The idea of one unknown creature was scary enough. A group of them, coordinating their movements, was terrifying. We found the second shelter about a quarter-mile from the first, deeper in the rhododendron thickets. This one was larger and more sophisticated, built around a natural rock overhang that provided additional protection. Inside, we found evidence of long-term habitation, fire pits, food storage areas, and dozens of footprints in various sizes. "Jesus Christ," Tom whispered as we crawled inside. "Bobby, I think we're looking at a family group, adults and juveniles." The implications hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some lone creature wandering through. This was an established population, living and breeding in the cranberry wilderness. How long had they been here? How many were there? Tom was taking photographs when we heard the first rock hit a tree about 50 yards away. A sharp crack like a rifle shot, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing through branches. "Warning shot," Tom said grimly. "They know we're here, and they're not happy about it." The second rock was bigger and closer, striking a pine tree hard enough to shake it. We could hear more movement in the undergrowth around us, but couldn't see anything through the thick vegetation. "We need to go," I said. "Now." Tom nodded and started packing his equipment. But as we prepared to leave the shelter, the sound stopped. Complete silence, just like I'd experienced the day before. The kind of silence that means every living thing in the area is holding its breath. That's when we saw it. Just a glimpse at first, through a gap in the rhododendron branches about 30 yards away. Something brown and massive, moving with surprising grace through vegetation that should have been impenetrable. Then it was gone, leaving only swaying branches to mark its passage. "Did you see that?" Tom asked. "Yeah. How big do you think it was?" 8 feet, maybe 9, and it was moving like it knew these woods better than we do. We made it about halfway back to the main trail before they started following us openly. At first it was just sounds, branches breaking, rocks rolling down slopes, the occasional grunt or call. But then we started catching glimpses of movement in our peripheral vision, shadows that were too large and moved too purposefully to be tricks of light. "They're hurting us," Tom realized, pushing us toward the trail, making sure we leave their territory. He was right. Every time we tried to deviate from the most direct route out, something would crash through the trees ahead of us, forcing us back on course. They wanted us gone, but they also wanted to make sure we left the way they wanted us to. The harassment continued for over an hour. Rocks thrown from the tree line, branches broken deliberately to create loud noises, and always that sense of being watched by multiple sets of eyes. But they never showed themselves fully, never got close enough for us to get a clear look. It wasn't until we reached the main trail that the activity stopped. As soon as we crossed onto the established hiking path, the sounds from the forest ceased entirely. Whatever these creatures were, they understood boundaries. "That was intelligent behavior," Tom said as we caught our breath. "Territorial, but controlled. They could have attacked us at any time in those thickets, but they chose intimidation instead." "What do you think they are?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, looking back toward the wilderness area. "Honestly, I think we just encountered something that science doesn't recognize yet. Something that's been living in these mountains for a lot longer than we have." We were almost back to the trailhead when Tom's radio crackled to life. Base station was trying to reach him, but the signal was breaking up badly. When we finally got close enough to the access road to establish clear communication, the news was bad. A family of hikers had reported finding torn camping equipment and strange tracks near Red Creek, about 5 miles north of where we'd been investigating. The description matched what we'd seen at Bear Creek. "It's spreading," Tom said grimly. "Or there are more of them than we thought." That night, Tom and I sat in my station going through all the evidence we'd collected. The photographs, the plaster casts, the audio recordings of those low-frequency communications. Taken individually, each piece could be explained away, but together, they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. "We need to close this area," Tom said finally, "at least until we figure out what we're dealing with." "On what grounds? We can't tell people we're closing 35,000 acres because of Bigfoot. Environmental protection, sensitive wildlife habitat. We'll think of something. But even as we made plans to restrict access to the area, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too late. These creatures had been living in the cranberry wilderness for who knows how long, and now we'd disturbed them. The question wasn't whether there would be more encounters. The question was whether anyone would survive them. The call came in at 3 a.m. Tom's voice on the radio was tight with fear. "Bobby, I need you at Red Creek immediately. Bring your rifle and a first aid kit." I'd never heard Tom sound scared before. In 30 years, he'd handled everything from armed poachers to rabid bears without losing his cool. But something in his voice made my blood run cold. I met him at the Red Creek trailhead just as dawn was breaking. His truck was there, but Tom was nowhere to be seen. I called his name and heard his voice from the tree line. "Over here. And Bobby, prepare yourself." I found him kneeling beside what was left of a campsite. 2 tents had been shredded, not cut or torn, but ripped apart like paper. Sleeping bags were scattered across 50 yards of forest floor, and camping equipment was bent and twisted into impossible shapes. "Where are the hikers?" I asked. Tom pointed toward a pile of gear near a large oak tree. "I found blood, but no bodies. Trail leads deeper into the wilderness." The tracks around the campsite told a clear story. Multiple sets of the large humanoid footprints moving in coordinated patterns around the tents. But there were also drag marks leading away from the site, and blood drops scattered along the trail. "How many?" I asked. "Family of 4, parents and 2 kids, ages 8 and 12. My stomach turned. Whatever these creatures were, they'd taken children. "We have to go after them," I said. Tom nodded grimly. "That's why I called you. But Bobby, we're not dealing with anything natural here. Look at this." He led me to the oak tree where the camping gear was piled. The tree was massive, probably 3 feet in diameter, but about 10 feet up the trunk, something had gouged deep claw marks into the bark. The marks were fresh, still weeping sap, and they were arranged in a pattern that looked almost like writing. "Territorial marking," Tom said. "But look at the height. Whatever made these marks was standing flat-footed and reached 10 feet up the tree." We followed the trail deeper into the wilderness. The drag marks were easy to follow at first, but after about a mile they stopped abruptly. Either the creatures had started carrying their victims, or something worse had happened. 3 hours into the search, we found the first body. The father was hanging from a tree branch about 15 feet off the ground. He'd been placed there deliberately, positioned so that anyone following the trail would see him clearly. The body showed massive trauma, but there was something ritualistic about the way it had been displayed. "They're sending a message," Tom said quietly, warning us to stay away. But we couldn't stop. Not with 3 people still missing, including 2 children. The trail led us into the deepest part of the cranberry wilderness, areas where the rhododendron thickets were so dense they blocked out most of the sunlight. We were crawling more than walking, following broken branches and scattered personal items. That's when we found the cave. It was hidden behind a waterfall, accessible only by climbing down a steep rock face. The entrance was partially concealed by vegetation, but the smell coming from inside was unmistakable. The same musky odor I'd encountered at the first campsite, but stronger. "This is their home," Tom whispered. "Their main den." The cave was larger than I'd expected, extending back into the mountain much farther than our flashlights could penetrate. The walls were covered with markings, not random scratches, but deliberate symbols and pictures that looked like primitive artwork. Some of the images showed human figures, but they were clearly meant to represent prey. Others showed the creatures themselves, drawn with an intelligence that was deeply unsettling. These weren't mindless beasts. They had culture, communication, and a complex understanding of their relationship with humans. Deep in the cave, we found the mother and her 2 children. They were alive, but barely. Hung from the cave wall by their wrists, suspended over what looked like the remains of previous victims. The smell was overwhelming. Decomposition, animal musk, and something else that made me gag. "Get them down," I told Tom. But as we approached, we heard movement from deeper in the cave. It came out of the darkness like a nightmare given form. 9 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair, with arms that reached nearly to the ground. But it was the eyes that stopped me cold. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, calculating, and absolutely filled with rage. The creature roared, and the sound was so deep and powerful that it made my teeth ache. Rock dust fell from the ceiling, and I could feel the vibrations in my bones. This wasn't just a call. It was a challenge. "Shoot it!" Tom yelled, but I couldn't move. The creature's eyes held mine, and I could see something in them that I'd never expected. Recognition. It knew exactly what we were, why we were there, and what we represented. More sounds came from the back of the cave. At least 2 more of the creatures, maybe 3. We were outnumbered, outmatched, and trapped in their territory. The alpha male, because that's clearly what this was, took a step toward us. Its footsteps shook the ground, and I could see muscles moving under its hide like steel cables. This was a creature that could tear a man apart without effort. But instead of attacking, it did something that changed everything. It spoke. Not words, not human language, but deliberate communication. A series of grunts and calls that were clearly meant to convey meaning. And somehow, impossibly, I understood part of it. It was telling us to leave, warning us that this was sacred ground, protected territory that humans had no right to enter. The images on the cave walls weren't just art. They were a historical record, showing generations of conflict between these creatures and human intruders. "Bobby," Tom whispered, "look at the bones." Scattered around the cave floor were hundreds of human bones, some old enough to be nearly fossilized. This wasn't a recent phenomenon. These creatures had been defending this territory for centuries, maybe longer. The alpha male gestured toward the hanging victims, then toward us. The message was clear. Take them and go, but never come back. We freed the family and carried them out of the cave, expecting an attack at any moment. But the creatures let us go. They followed us to the cave entrance and watched as we climbed back up to the forest floor, but they didn't try to stop us. The last thing I saw as we reached the top of the rock face was the alpha male standing at the waterfall's edge. It raised one massive hand in what could only be described as a farewell gesture, but there was a promise in that gesture too. A warning that this was our only free pass. Next time, there would be no mercy. The mother and children survived, but they never spoke about what happened in that cave. The official report listed their experience as a bear attack with subsequent disorientation and hypothermia. The father's death was attributed to accidental fall while fleeing aggressive wildlife. Nobody asked too many questions. Nobody wanted to know the truth. Tom and I submitted our real findings to the State Wildlife Commission, along with all our evidence. 2 weeks later, we received orders to seal all records related to the investigation and never discuss our findings with anyone outside the department. The Cranberry Wilderness was quietly closed to public access, designated as a sensitive ecological preserve. No camping, no hunting, no hiking off established trails. The official reason was protection of an endangered salamander species. But Tom and I knew better. I've continued working these mountains for the past year, but I've never gone back to that part of the wilderness. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I can hear them calling to each other across the valleys. Long, low sounds that carry for miles. Communications between creatures that have learned to stay hidden from a world that would never understand them. Other rangers have reported strange incidents over the past months. Equipment theft, unusual tracks, the feeling of being watched. But nothing as dramatic as what Tom and I encountered. It's like they've pulled back deeper into the mountains, away from any possibility of human contact. I think about them often, especially the intelligence I saw in that alpha male's eyes. These aren't monsters or demons from folklore. They're a species that has survived in these mountains for thousands of years by avoiding human contact. We stumbled into their world, and they made it clear that we weren't welcome. The mother who survived still sends me Christmas cards. She never mentions what happened, but she always includes a note thanking me for bringing them home safely. She doesn't know that I had very little to do with their survival. The creatures chose to let them go. Last month, I found fresh tracks near Bear Creek again. Smaller ones this time, probably juveniles, learning to hunt and forage. The population is stable, maybe even growing, but they're staying away from the areas where humans might encounter them. I've become an unofficial guardian of their secret. When hunters ask about the closed areas, I give them the official story about salamander protection. When hikers want to explore the deeper wilderness, I find ways to steer them towards safer areas. Some nights I sit on my porch and wonder what would happen if the truth came out. Scientific expeditions, media attention, government involvement. It would destroy them. These creatures have survived by remaining hidden, and it's up to people like me to make sure they can continue to do so. Tom retired 6 months after our encounter. Said he was getting too old for this kind of work, but I think the truth is that he was scared. We'd seen something that challenged everything we thought we knew about the natural world, and it changed us both. Before he left, he gave me a piece of advice. Some parts of these mountains aren't meant for human intrusion, Bobby. Respect that, and they'll respect you. I've followed that advice. The cranberry wilderness belongs to them now, officially and unofficially. And as long as I'm wearing this badge, I'll make sure it stays that way. Because I've learned that there are older things in these mountains than human civilization. Things that have their own rules, their own territories, and their own ways of dealing with intruders. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they'll give you a warning instead of making you disappear forever. But you only get one warning. After that, you become part of their story, scattered among the bones in caves that will never appear on any map. I've seen enough to know that some secrets are worth keeping, no matter what the cost. The beast of cranberry wilderness is real, and it's watching, always watching. And as long as we respect its boundaries, it might just let us live. My name is Elizabeth Shepard, but everybody calls me Liz. I've been a park ranger on Grandfather Mountain for 21 years now, and I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Ice storms that come out of nowhere. Hikers who think flip-flops are good climbing shoes. Lightning that can split a tree right down the middle. But I never believed in the old Cherokee stories about spirits living up on the summit. Always figured that was just mountain talk. You know, the kind of stories folks tell around campfires to scare each other. I wish I still felt that way. It was November 1979, and the weather had been acting strange all month. One day it would be 60 degrees and sunny. The next we'd wake up to frost thick as cotton on the windows. The weather service kept scratching their heads, saying their instruments couldn't make sense of the pressure readings coming off the mountain. I run the weather station up at the summit, 5 to 946 feet above sea level, where the air gets thin and the wind never stops blowing. Been doing it for 15 years, ever since I got back from burying my husband after Korea. The mountain became my home, my job, my whole life. I know every rock, every trail, every place where the weather likes to change without warning. That's why what happened next scared me so bad. It started on a Tuesday morning when I got a call from dispatch. 2 hikers had reported seeing a tall gray man near the summit just before a sudden storm hit. They barely made it down alive, both of them half frozen and talking crazy about how the temperature dropped 40 degrees in 10 minutes. Probably just mountain fog, I told Jenny at the radio desk. You know how it can look like shapes when the wind gets hold of it. But when I checked my weather instruments that morning, something was wrong. The barometer showed a reading that was impossible. Pressed. Sure changes that should have taken hours happening in minutes. My thermometer had recorded a temperature drop from 68 degrees to 31 degrees at exactly 2:47 p.m. the day before, right when those hikers said they saw the gray figure. I've rescued over 150 people from this mountain. Broken bones, heart attacks, hypothermia, lightning strikes, you name it. I've trained 30 other rangers in high-altitude rescue. I know weather like some people know their own children, and I know when something doesn't make sense. The thing is, Cherokee folks who work in the park have always talked about the gray man. Samuel Crow Feather, who helps us with the nature programs, says his grandfather told stories about a spirit that guards the mountain, keeps people away who don't belong up there. But I always figured it was just tradition, you know? Stories passed down to keep people safe by making them scared. I remember laughing when Samuel first told me about it 5 years ago. Come on, Sam, I said. I've been up there 1,000 times. Never seen anything but rocks and clouds. He just smiled in that quiet way of his and said, maybe the mountain knows you belong. I thought about that conversation as I loaded my gear that Tuesday morning. Radio, first aid kit, emergency blankets, rope, the works. I was heading up to check the weather station and see if I could figure out what was wrong with my instruments. The hike up to the summit takes about an hour if you're in good shape and know the trail. I've done it so many times I could walk it blindfolded. Past the visitor center, up through the spruce and fir trees, then above the tree line where the wind really gets hold of you. The last quarter mile is all exposed rock, just you and the sky and whatever weather decides to roll in. It was a beautiful morning when I started up. Clear blue sky, temperature around 65 degrees, light breeze fairs, from the southwest. Perfect hiking weather. The kind of day that makes you understand why people drive hundreds of miles just to stand on top of this old mountain. But as I got higher, started noticing things, little things that made the hair on my arms stand up. The birds were too quiet. Usually you hear crows and hawks calling from the thermals, but the air was dead silent except for my boots on the trail. And the wind felt wrong. Not steady like it should be, but coming in little puffs from different directions, like something big was moving around up ahead of me. When I got to the weather station, my instruments were going crazy. The wind gauge was spinning like a pinwheel, even though I could barely feel any breeze. The barometer needle was jumping up and down like it couldn't make up its mind. And the temperature reading kept changing, 65, 58, 72, 61, cycling every few seconds. I checked all the connections, cleaned the sensors, ran every test I knew. Everything looked fine, but the readings kept acting like the mountain was having some kind of weather seizure. That's when I heard the radio crackle. Base to Ranger Shepard. Come in, Liz. This is Shepard. Go ahead, Jenny. We just got another call. 3 hikers stuck somewhere between the summit and Devil's Courthouse. They're reporting sudden fog and can't see the trail, but Liz... Her voice sounded worried. The Weather Service says it's clear skies all across the region. I looked around. She was right. I could see for 50 miles in every direction. Not a cloud in the sky. I'm heading over there now, I said into the radio. Keep them on the line and tell them to stay put. Devil's Courthouse is about a half mile from the main summit, connected by a narrow ridge trail. It's tricky in good weather because of the drop-offs on both sides. In fog, it's deadly. As I started across the ridge, I felt that strange wind again. Little puffs of cold air that seemed to come from nowhere. And then, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There was fog rolling up from the valley, but it only in one small area, like someone had turned on a fog machine in the forest below. It was rising straight up the mountainside, thick and gray and moving too fast to be natural. And in the middle of it, just for a second, I thought I saw a shape, tall, thin, walking through the mist like it owned the place. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks. When you're up that high, the thin air can make you see things that aren't there. But my hands were shaking as I clipped my safety rope to the rocks and started across the ridge toward Devil's Courthouse. The fog was moving faster now, climbing the mountain like it had somewhere important to be. And it was getting cold, really cold. I could see my breath, even though my thermometer still read 65 degrees. Hello, I called out as I got closer to where the hikers should be. Park Service, where are you? A voice came back through the fog, thin and scared. Here, we're here. Please help us. I followed the sound and found them huddled behind a boulder about 20 feet off the main trail. 2 men and a woman, all in their 30s, wearing good hiking gear but looking scared out of their minds. The woman was shivering so hard she could barely talk. Thank God you found us, one of the men said. His name was Mike, and he kept looking around like something might jump out at them. The fog came out of nowhere. 1 minute we could see forever, the next minute we couldn't see our own feet. How long have you been stuck here? I asked, checking them for signs of hypothermia. About an hour, the woman said. Her name was Sarah. But that's not the worst part. There's something in the fog with us, something big. The third hiker, a guy named Tom, nodded fast. We heard footsteps, heavy ones, like someone wearing boots. But when we called out, nothing answered back. The footsteps just stopped. Now when I looked around, the fog was so thick I couldn't see more than 5 feet in any direction. It wasn't natural fog either. It was too gray, too heavy, and it moved wrong. Natural fog drifts with the wind, but this stuff seemed to swirl around on its own. "Okay, we're getting out of here," I said, pulling out my emergency rope. "I'm going to tie us all together and lead you back to the main trail. Stay close and don't let go." That's when we heard it. Footsteps, heavy boots on rock, somewhere in the fog ahead of us. Slow, steady steps, like someone taking their time, knowing exactly where they were going. "Is that another ranger?" Sarah whispered. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Shepard. Do we have any other personnel in the Devil's Courthouse area?" "Negative, Liz. You're the only one up there." The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, closer this time. And now I could hear something else. A sound like wind, but not quite wind. Like breathing, but too big to be human. "We need to move, now." I started leading them toward where I thought the main trail was, following my compass and hoping I was right. The fog seemed to press in around us, thick as soup, and the temperature kept dropping. That's when Tom screamed. I spun around and saw him pointing behind us. There, in the fog, was a shape, tall, maybe 8 feet tall, and gray as the mist around it. I could see it for just a second before the fog swirled and hid it again. "What the hell was that?" Mike said, his voice high and tight. I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say. In 21 years on this mountain, I'd never seen anything like it. The shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin, and it moved like it was made of the fog itself. "Keep moving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't look back." But as we stumbled through the fog, I could feel it following us. Those heavy footsteps, always about 20 feet behind, matching our pace. Whenever one of the hikers would trip or slow down, the footsteps would get closer. When we sped up, they'd back off. Like something wild, us hurting us. The fog started to thin as we got closer to the main trail, and I could see patches of clear sky through the gray. My radio crackled with Jenny's voice. "Liz, are you okay up there? We're getting some really weird weather readings from your location." "We're fine," I lied, almost back to the trail. But just as the fog began to clear completely, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice, deep and echoing, coming from somewhere in the mist behind us. "Leave." It wasn't quite human. The word was clear enough, but it sounded like wind blowing through a cave, like rocks grinding together. And it was loud enough that all 4 of us heard it. The hikers didn't need to be told twice. As soon as we hit the main trail and could see where we were going, they took off running toward the parking area. I started to follow them, but something made me turn around for one last look. The fog was pulling back down the mountain, disappearing into the valley like someone had called it home. And standing there on the ridge, clear as day in the afternoon sunlight, was the gray figure. It was definitely shaped like a person, but wrong in every way that mattered. Too tall, too thin, and it seemed to shift and move even when it was standing still. Like it was made of smoke that couldn't quite decide what shape it wanted to be. It was looking right at me. We stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds, though it felt like an hour. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing behind the rocks like it had never been there at all. I stood there, shaking, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. The rational part of my brain was coming up with explanations. Altitude sickness, optical illusions, stress from the rescue. But my gut knew better. There was something on my mountain that shouldn't be there. When I got back to the ranger station, the 3 hikers were ready giving their report to Jenny. I could hear them through the window, all talking at once, their voices still shaky from fear. 8 feet tall, I swear to God. Made of fog, but solid at the same time. That voice. Jesus, that voice. Jenny saw me coming and met me at the door. "Liz, what happened up there? These folks are saying some pretty wild things." I looked at the hikers, then at Jenny, then at the mountain looming outside the window. "Altitude sickness," I said finally. Makes people see things sometimes. The fog probably just looks strange in the light. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Samuel had told me years ago about the gray man, about spirits that guard the mountain and keep away people who don't belong. And I kept wondering, if that thing was trying to protect the mountain, why had it let me see it? Why had it been watching me like it knew who I was? I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that gray figure standing on the ridge, tall as a tree and twice as wrong. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, stress from the rescue, maybe some kind of weather phenomenon I'd never seen before. But when I got to work the next morning, I knew something was really wrong. There were 3 more reports of strange sightings on the mountain. A family camping near the base said they'd seen a tall gray man walking through their campsite at dawn, moving between the trees without making a sound. A group of rock climbers reported that their ropes had been arranged in perfect spirals during the night, even though they'd left them scattered by their tents. And then there was the worst one. Jenny handed me the incident report with a grim look. State police found 2 hikers this morning about a mile from the summit, both dead. Hypothermia. Hypothermia. I looked at the weather data. It was 68 degrees yesterday. That's what doesn't make sense. The bodies were frozen solid, like they'd been caught in a blizzard, but their camping gear was dry, and there's no sign of any storm in the area. I read through the report twice, but it didn't get any clearer. 2 experienced hikers, good gear, perfect weather, and they'd frozen to death on a warm November day. "I'm going up there," I said. "Liz, maybe you should wait for the investigation team. I know that mountain better than anyone. If there's something dangerous up there, I need to see it for myself." The hike up felt different this time. The woods were too quiet again, and I kept getting the feeling that something was watching me from the trees. My weather instruments were acting up worse than ever. The temperature gauge couldn't seem to decide if it was 70 degrees or 30 degrees, switching back and forth every few minutes. I found the campsite where the hikers had died. It was in a clearing about a mile below the summit, protected from wind, good drainage, the kind of spot any smart hiker would choose. Their tent was still standing, gear neatly arranged, no signs of struggle. But the ground around their tent was covered in frost, even though the rest of the clearing was dry and warm. I walked the perimeter, trying to make sense of it. The frost formed a perfect circle around the campsite, maybe 30 feet across. Outside the circle, the grass was green and normal. Inside, everything was white and brittle with ice. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were pressed into the frost, clear as anything. Human-shaped, but huge, at least size 15, maybe bigger. And they didn't lead anywhere. They just appeared at the edge of the frost circle, walked around the tent 3 times, and then stopped right in front of the entrance. Like something had come to check on the hikers and decided they shouldn't be there. My radio crackled. "Liz, this is Sam Crowfeather. Are you up on the mountain today?" I'd never been so glad to hear someone's voice. "Sam, yeah, I'm at the campsite where those hikers died. Can you come up here? I need someone else to see this." "On my way. And Liz, be careful. The mountain feels angry today." I spent the next hour taking pictures and measurements, trying to document everything before the investigation team arrived. But the longer I stayed, the more wrong everything felt. The air was too still, like the mountain was holding its breath. And I kept hearing things, footsteps in the woods, branches breaking, sometimes what sounded like voices calling from far away. When Sam arrived, he took one look at the frost circle and went very quiet. "This is bad, Liz," he said finally. "This is very bad. You've seen something like this before?" He knelt down and touched the frost with his fingers. My grandfather told me stories about what happens when people come to the mountain without respect, without understanding. The gray man comes to test them. If they pass the test, he lets them stay. If they don't, they freeze to death in perfect weather. The stories say he brings winter with him, old winter, from when the world was young and the cold could kill with a touch. Sam stood up and looked toward the summit. He's been awakened by something. Too many people, maybe, or people who don't understand what this place is. That's when we heard the footsteps. Heavy boots on dry leaves, coming from the woods behind us. Sam and I both turned, but we couldn't see anything through the trees. The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, from a different direction. Like whatever was making them had moved 50 feet in the time it took us to blink. "We should go," Sam said quietly. "Wait." I pulled out my radio. "Base, this is Shepard. I need you to check something for me. How many people are registered for overnight camping on the mountain right now?" "Hold on. Looks like we have 12 people in various camping areas. Why?" 12 people. Scattered across the mountain in tents and sleeping bags, with no idea that something was hunting them. "Jenny, I need you to contact all the registered campers and tell them to pack up and head down immediately. Tell them there's a weather emergency coming." "Liz, the forecast shows clear skies for the next 3 days." The footsteps were getting closer now, and I could hear that sound again. Like wind, but too rhythmic to be natural. Like breathing. "Just do it, Jenny, and send up every available ranger. We need to get everyone off this mountain tonight." As Sam and I headed back down the trail, I told him everything that had happened the day before. The fog, the gray figure, the voice telling us to leave. He listened without interrupting, his face getting more serious with every detail. "The gray man usually just watches," he said when I finished. "Shows himself as a warning. But if people don't listen to the warning, he gets more direct." My grandfather said he could bring winter storms out of clear skies, freeze rivers solid in the middle of summer, and if someone really didn't belong on the mountain. Sam shook his head. "The stories get pretty dark after that." We were about halfway down when my radio erupted with panic. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Campsite 7. We need help up here." I grabbed the radio. "This is Ranger Shepard. What's your emergency?" "The temperature just dropped to freezing in the last 5 minutes. Our water bottles are turning to ice and we can see our breath. There's frost forming on everything. Get to your car and get off the mountain now. Don't stop to pack." "We can't. There's fog everywhere. We can't see the trail." Sam and I looked at each other. The fog was starting again, rolling up from the valleys on all sides of the mountain, and somewhere in that fog, I knew the gray man was walking. "Base, this is Shepard. Declare a mountain emergency and call for search and rescue backup. We've got people trapped up here." "Liz, what kind of emergency? The Weather Service says—" "I don't care what they say. Something's wrong with this mountain and people are going to die if we don't get them off tonight." As we ran down the trail, I could hear more calls coming in on the radio. Campers reporting sudden temperature drops, fog so thick they couldn't see their own hands, strange sounds in the woods around their tents. And then, cutting through all the panic and confusion, we heard something that made us both stop running. A voice, deep and echoing, rolling down from the summit like thunder. "Leave, all of you. Leave now." It was loud enough that I knew everyone on the mountain had heard it. And this time, there was no mistaking it for wind or imagination. The gray man wasn't hiding anymore. The next 2 hours were chaos. Every camping group on the mountain was reporting the same thing: sudden frost, thick fog, and temperatures dropping so fast their breath was coming out in clouds. 3 more groups got lost in the fog trying to find their way down. One family called in screaming about a giant gray shadow walking circles around their campsite. I coordinated the rescue efforts from the base station while Sam and 4 other rangers spread out across the mountain to guide people down. But every time we got one group to safety, another one would call in panic. The thing that scared me most was my weather instruments. They'd gone completely insane, showing temperatures ranging from 80 degrees to 20 degrees, pressure readings that made no sense, wind directions that changed every 30 seconds. It was like the mountain had its own weather system that didn't follow any natural laws. "Liz," Jenny said, handing me another radio report. "State police want to know if we should call in the National Guard. They're saying this looks like some kind of terrorist attack or chemical spill." "Tell them it's under control," I said, though that was the biggest lie I'd ever told. "We just need to get everyone off the mountain." By midnight, we'd managed to get 10 of the 12 camping groups down safely, but 2 were still up there somewhere in the fog, and their radios had gone silent but an hour ago. "I'm going back up," I told Sam. "Liz, no, it's too dangerous. Whatever's up there, it's getting stronger." He was right. I could feel it even from the base station. A wrongness in the air, like the mountain itself was angry. The fog had gotten so thick it looked like a gray wall rising up from the valleys, and the temperature had dropped 30 degrees in the last hour. But somewhere in that fog were two groups of people who were counting on me to find them. "This is my mountain, Sam. I've been taking care of it for 21 years, and I'm not going to let people die on it now." I loaded my pack with emergency gear: blankets, food, rope, flares, everything I could carry. Sam insisted on coming with me, along with Tom Bradley, a younger ranger who'd just transferred from the Smokies. The hike up was like walking into a freezer. The fog was so thick we had to use flashlights even though there was a full moon. Ice was forming on the trees and our breath came out in thick clouds. But the worst part was the sound. Footsteps. All around us in the fog, heavy boots walking on ice and rock. Sometimes they seemed far away, sometimes so close I'd spin around expecting to see someone right behind me. But there was never anything there except gray mist and shadows. "This is impossible," Tom kept saying. "Weather doesn't work this way. You can't have a blizzard in one spot when it's clear everywhere else." "Tell that to the mountain," Sam said quietly. We found the first missing group about a mile up the trail. A family of 4 from Georgia, huddled together behind a boulder and half frozen with fear. They'd been trying to get down for hours but kept getting turned around in the fog. "There's something following us," the father said, his voice shaking. "Something big. We can hear it walking around us, but we can't see what it is." As if summoned by his words, he heard those footsteps again. Slow, steady, circling our position. I could feel eyes watching us from the fog, but every time I pointed my flashlight toward the sound, there was nothing. There. "Everyone stay close," I said, roping us all together. "We're getting off this mountain right now." But as we started down the trail, the fog got thicker, thick enough that I couldn't see my own feet, couldn't tell up from down. My compass was spinning like a top, and the trail seemed to disappear under our feet. That's when the voice came again. "You should have left when I warned you." It was right there in the fog with us, close enough that I should have been able to reach out and touch whoever was speaking. But there was nothing there except gray mist and cold air. "We're trying to leave," I called out. "We're trying to get these people to safety. Too late. They have trespassed. They have shown no respect." The temperature dropped again, so fast I could feel my skin burning with cold. Ice began forming on our clothes, and the family's little girl started crying because her tears were freezing on her cheeks. "They didn't know," I shouted into the fog. "They're just tourists. They don't understand the mountain like we do." The footsteps stopped. Then, slowly, a shape began to form in the fog ahead of us. 8 feet tall, gray as storm clouds, with eyes that glowed white in the darkness. The gray man stood there looking at us, and I could feel the cold radiating off him like heat from a fire. Tom made a sound like a strangled scream and stumbled backward. The family pressed against each other, too scared to even cry. But Sam stepped forward, calm as anything. He spoke in Cherokee, words I didn't understand but could feel the meaning of. Respectful words, old words, the kind you'd use when talking to something powerful and dangerous. The gray man tilted his head, listening. Then he answered in the same language, his voice like wind through caves. "What's he saying?" I whispered. "I told him we acknowledge his guardianship of the mountain," Sam said quietly, "that we respect his authority and ask permission to take these people to safety." "And what did he say back?" "He wants to know why he should trust us, why he should believe we won't bring more people who will disrespect this place." I looked at the gray man, meeting those glowing white eyes. He was ancient. I could feel it, the weight of centuries in his presence. He'd been guarding this mountain since before there were trails, before there were rangers, maybe before there were people at all. "Because it's my job," I said, surprising myself by speaking directly to him. "I've been taking care of this mountain for 21 years. I've saved lives, taught people how to be safe up here, made sure they understand what they're dealing with. I don't want tourists dying any more than you do." The gray man studied me for a long moment. Then he spoke again, and this time I could understand the words, even though he was still speaking Cherokee. You know the mountain. You understand winter's power. But others come with loud voices and careless feet. They take without asking, leave without gratitude. Then help me teach them, I said. Let me get these people down safely, and I promise I'll find a way to make sure anyone who comes up here knows what this place is, knows it's sacred, knows it's yours. The gray man was quiet for so long I thought he might just disappear back into the fog. But finally, he nodded once. The fog began to pull back, slowly at first, then faster. The temperature started rising, and I could see stars appearing overhead. Within minutes, the trail was clear, and we could see the lights of the ranger station far below. Go, the gray man said, but remember your promise. As we led the family down the mountain, I kept looking back over my shoulder. The gray man stood there watching us until we were out of sight, a tall, gray guardian making sure we actuals. Lai left his domain. It took us another hour to get everyone down safely. The second missing group had found their own way to the parking lot while we were up there, scared but unharmed. By dawn, the mountain was empty of campers and the weather was back to normal. But I knew things would never be normal for me again. That was 3 months ago, and I haven't told this story to anyone except Sam until now. The official report said it was an unusual weather pattern caused by temperature inversion and mountain fog. The 2 hikers who died were listed as victims of unexpected hypothermia. Case closed. But I kept my promise to the gray man. I started requiring safety orientations for anyone wanting to camp above 4,000 feet. Real orientations, not just the usual don't feed the bears talk. I tell them about the mountain's history, about the Cherokee who lived here for thousands of years, about the spirits that some people believe still watch over this place. I don't tell them about the gray man directly. They'd think I was crazy. But I teach them respect. I make sure they understand they're visitors in something's home, and they better act like it. Sam helps with the orientations. He tells the traditional stories, explains why certain areas are sacred, teaches people how to move through the woods without disturbing the natural balance. Most folks listen politely and think we're just being colorful mountain guides. But some of them, the ones who really hear what we're saying, they nod like they understand. Those are the ones who usually have the best camping experiences, the ones who come back talking about how peaceful and spiritual the mountain felt. Funny thing is, we haven't had any more incidents since I started the new orientations. No mysterious weather, no frozen campers, no reports of gray figures in the fog. It's like the mountain has settled down, satisfied that people are finally being taught how to behave up there. My weather instruments still act up sometimes, especially when storms are coming in. But now I think of it as the mountain talking. To me, letting me know what's happening before the official forecasts catch up. I've started trusting those readings more than the National Weather Service reports, and I've been right about dangerous weather conditions 5 times in the last month. The other rangers think I've developed some kind of supernatural weather sense, if they only knew. I still see the gray man sometimes, usually just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye when I'm doing maintenance on the summit weather station. He doesn't approach anymore, doesn't make himself fully visible. But I know he's there, watching, making sure I'm keeping up my end of the bargain. And I am. Because I learned something important on that foggy night 3 months ago. This mountain isn't just rock and trees and tourist trails. It's home to something old and powerful, something that's been protecting this place since long before I was born. Some people might call that crazy. They might say I was suffering from altitude sickness or stress, or that I imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. There are things in these mountains that don't follow the rules we learned in ranger training. The Cherokee knew it. Sam's grandfather knew it. And now I know it too. So if you're ever planning to camp on Grandfather Mountain, do me a favor. Take the orientation seriously. Listen when we tell you about respecting the mountain and the things that live here. Pack the right gear, follow the rules, and remember that you're a guest in someone else's home. Because the gray man is still up there, still watching, still protecting his mountain from people who don't belong. And trust me, You don't want to find out what happens to people who don't listen to warnings. The mountain has ways of teaching respect to those who refuse to learn it any other way. And some lessons are colder than others.